Beneath the towering columns of ancient temples, where the sun carved shadows across limestone walls and the eyes of painted gods seemed to follow every movement, there existed a world of absolute order. Ancient Egypt was a civilization built on precision, in architecture, in ritual, in the very structure of society itself. But nowhere was this precision more brutal, more unforgiving, than in the system of justice that governed the lives of women. For those who dared to step beyond the boundaries set by tradition, law, and male authority, the consequences were not merely harsh. They were designed to destroy. Adultery was not treated as a private matter, not a quiet scandal to be whispered about behind closed doors. It was a crime that struck at the very foundation of Egyptian society. In a culture where lineage determined power, where inheritance passed through carefully guarded bloodlines, and where the legitimacy of children was paramount to the stability of dynasties, a woman's faithfulness was never truly her own concern. It belonged to her husband, it belonged to her family, it belonged to the state. And when that faithfulness was questioned, when accusations arose, whether proven or merely rumored, the response was swift, public, and merciless. Within the households of the elite, among the nobility and the priestly classes who controlled the wealth and spiritual life of the kingdom, a woman's chastity was not just a matter of morality, it was a matter of honor. Her husband's reputation rested on her behavior. His position in society, his standing among his peers, his very identity as a man of authority could be shattered by the mere suggestion that his wife had betrayed him. And so the law did not wait for certainty. It did not require evidence beyond doubt. An accusation, particularly from a husband or male guardian, could be enough to set the machinery of punishment into motion. One of the most common forms of punishment was public flogging. This was not carried out in darkness or behind the walls of a prison. It happened in the open, in spaces where the community gathered, near market squares where merchants sold grain and pottery, outside temple enclosures where priests performed rituals, in courtyards where neighbors could watch and bear witness. The punishment was not designed solely to cause pain, though pain was certainly inflicted. It was designed to humiliate, to strip away dignity, to turn a woman into an example for all others who might consider stepping out of line. The Wilbur Papyrus, a document from the late New Kingdom that primarily deals with land ownership and taxation, offers glimpses into the rigid hierarchy of Egyptian society. Though it does not describe specific punishments in detail, it reveals a legal order where women, despite having certain rights, such as owning property and representing themselves in court, were rarely treated as equals before the law. When it came to accusations of adultery, the scales of justice were heavily weighted against them. A woman's word carried less weight than a man's. Her defense, if she was even permitted to offer one, could be dismissed with ease. Legal texts from the New Kingdom confirm that women face severe penalties for adultery, particularly if the accusation came from a husband. The punishment could range from public beatings to far worse. And in cases involving the royal court or politically sensitive situations, the response could be catastrophic. One of the most chilling examples comes from the reign of Ramesses III during what is now known as the Harem Conspiracy. Though the conspiracy was primarily a political plot, an attempt to assassinate the pharaoh and place a different heir on the throne, the court records, preserved on documents like the Turin Judicial Papyrus, reveal how women involved with palace guards or conspirators were subjected to brutal punishments, public beatings, mutilations, and worse. This was not about justice in any modern sense. It was about control. It was about reinforcing the boundaries that women were not permitted to cross. The spectacle of punishment ensured that everyone who watched would remember the price of disobedience. Fear was the tool, and public suffering was the method. There was no recourse, no appeal, no second chance. The sentence was immediate, and the shame was permanent. The woman who was accused, whether guilty or not, carried that mark for the rest of her life. And while the stone walls of Egypt's temples still stand today, monuments to a civilization that valued order above all else, the echoes of these women's cries have long since faded into the desert sands. But flogging, brutal as it was not the worst punishment a woman could face. For those accused of crimes considered even more severe, For women whose alleged betrayal extended into the realms of politics or dynasty, the state had other methods. One of the most horrifying was nose cutting, a practice that transformed the human face into a permanent declaration of guilt. This was not a punishment inflicted randomly or on common people. It was reserved for specific cases, for women of higher status whose perceived betrayal carried consequences beyond the personal. In the royal court and among noble households, where reputation was everything and the legitimacy of heirs could determine the fate of kingdoms, a woman suspected of adultery was not merely a criminal. She was a threat. The practice of nose cutting was both punitive and symbolic. To lose one's nose in ancient Egypt was to be marked forever. The face, so central to Egyptian art and religious belief, was sacred. It was the part of the body that identified a person not just in life, but in the afterlife. Statues and tomb paintings depicted individuals with careful attention to facial features, because the Egyptians believed that the soul needed to recognize the body in order to reunite with it after death. Ramesses III survived, and what followed was one of the most detailed criminal investigations in ancient Egyptian history. Over 40 people were brought before a special tribunal. The proceedings were recorded on the Judicial Papyrus of Turin, a document that offers a rare glimpse into the workings of Egyptian justice. The male conspirators faced execution, some forced to take their own lives, others killed by order of the court. But for certain women involved in the plot, the punishment was different. The tribunal decreed that they be taken to a place and left there, a phrase that has been interpreted by scholars as a death sentence by burial alive. This method avoided the shedding of royal blood, which would have been considered sacrilegious, while still ensuring a slow and inescapable death. The women were taken to remote locations, perhaps in the desert, perhaps in hidden chambers beneath the palace grounds. They were placed into the earth while still breathing, and the ground was sealed above them. No tombs were prepared, no funerary rites were performed. In a society obsessed with the afterlife, where every person's soul required careful passage through the underworld, to die without proper burial was to be denied eternity itself. This was not merely a physical death, it was spiritual erasure. Without mummification, without the rituals and prayers that accompanied every proper burial, the soul could not reunite with the body. It could not pass judgment before Osiris. It could not enter the field of reeds, the Egyptian paradise. These women, betrayers of the divine order, were condemned not just to die, but to vanish, from memory, from legacy, from the eternal world that every Egyptian hoped to enter. And so they were buried, still breathing, still aware, left alone in the darkness to suffocate slowly beneath the weight of the earth. But there was one more form of punishment, one more way that ancient Egypt dealt with women whose crimes made them unfit for society, but whose execution would have been politically complicated. This was the punishment of exile, and the place to which such women were sent was a site of notorious despair. Rhinocolura. Located along the Sinai coast, near the border of modern Gaza and Egypt, Rhinocolura was known in antiquity as a place where the condemned went to disappear. The name itself, derived from the Greek words for nose and cut off, was said to describe the mutilated exiles who populated the settlement. Though exact Egyptian records about Rhinocolura are scarce, multiple classical sources, including the historians Diodorus Siculus and Strabo, refer to it as a penal colony. It was a place where criminals, particularly those convicted of treason or moral crimes, were sent after mutilation. These included both men and women whose offenses had made them unfit for Egyptian society, but who were too politically sensitive to be executed outright. Women sentenced to Rhinocolura were often those connected to the palace, servants, priestesses, lesser wives implicated in conspiracies or acts of disloyalty. Stripped of their names, their families, and their rights to an afterlife, they were expelled from the land of the Nile and sent to a desert where survival was uncertain. Life in Rhinocolura was harsh beyond measure. The settlement lay on arid, barren ground, surrounded by sand dunes and saline swamps. Food was scarce. Water was unreliable. Those exiled there were marked not just by their crimes, but by physical mutilation. A cut nose meant instant recognition, a permanent symbol of disgrace that no veil or passage of time could conceal. Unlike death, exile was meant to last. It offered no closure, no burial, no return. A woman sent to Rhinocolura would never see her home again. Her name would be erased from household records, her image chipped away from tomb walls. In a culture obsessed with memory and immortality, she was condemned to the worst fate imaginable, to be forgotten. These punishments, flogging, nose cutting, burial alive, desert exile, were not arbitrary. They were deliberate, calculated acts designed to reinforce the social order. They were warnings written in flesh and bone, reminders to every woman in Egypt that the boundaries set by men and gods were not to be crossed. And they serve as echoes from a distant age, reminders of what happens when justice becomes spectacle, when power seeks not just to punish, but to erase. As Diodorus Siculus wrote, describing the exiles of Rhinocolura, they were settled in a colony on the edge of the desert, their noses cut off, their lives reduced to survival and silence.